But we're going to kick off with the subject of the BBC and the Irish Light newspaper. Now, it was only a little while ago that the BBC laid into the Light newspaper, having done an interview with the Light team. Essentially, they then went flat out to destroy the reputation of the Light newspaper. And one thing the BBC certainly didn't do is take any time to look at information which was accurately portrayed in the Light. But here they are, they're now going for the Irish Light newspaper. And the key target is Gemma O'Doherty, who has worked extremely hard to help bring this newspaper to fruition. And the key point is that apparently the Irish Light named a young man, Diego Gilsonan, and said that he died as a result of vaccine injury. But it turned out, or from the BBC's claim, that this wasn't true. And as a result, his mother has now made I think it's a defamation claim against the Irish Light newspaper. Now, this has become huge news because, of course, it's the BBC's own Marianna Spring who's decided to take this one on. And in the BBC's article, there are a number of questions to be raised, including who is actually funding the legal case. The article says that it's being done on the basis of donations, but could it be that our very own BBC is actually putting money in to help move this situation on? The problem is we just don't know. But what we do know is that Marianna Spring has boasted of setting up false accounts so that she can monitor what she calls the conspiracy theory network. So is the BBC just reporting, David, or is the BBC actually encouraging the whole thing into being?
It's very difficult to know because it's such a one-sided article. It's so partisan. It's so much. It's so aggressive towards the Irish Light newspaper, and it's not looking to have any balance or any judgment. It wouldn't seem unlikely that they would be promoting a case.
Indeed. Well, according to the BBC, we've got no worries because let's quote from this. It says, deaths from COVID vaccines are extremely rare. UK figures record 55 deaths where the vaccine was given as the underlying cause out of more than 50 million people who have had at least one dose. But of course, the BBC itself has done absolutely no proper investigation into what the true casualty figures of the vaccinations are. And clearly, clearly they're not going to do it in this article. So let's just briefly pop Marianna Spring back on screen. She is clearly enjoying her new celebrity status as Marianna in Conspiracyland. We like to call her the BBC's bunny girl because she's very keen on getting us to look down the rabbit hole. But in fact, this lady has now set herself up as witchfinder, really general for the truth. But of course, it's not the real truth. It's only the truth as Marianna sees it. And if we just follow on through the advertising on the BBC website, this is a trend which I think is extremely dangerous, where we have Marianna Spring weaving in the idea that anybody that challenges anything the government says, particularly on vaccines, could become a violent movement. This, David, to me, sets the scene. She's labelling people. She's not doing the proper investigation into why there are all these concerns and what's her objective at the end of the day. It seems to me to brand anybody who dares question the government's official line, and of course that line's taken up at the BBC, you are going to be labelled probably right-wing extremist. Why have I introduced right-wing? Well, thank you to the viewer who picked up this from the Epoch Times. BBC retracts far-right characterisation of ULEZ protesters. And this was a classic with the BBC, that the protest was about issues to do with the ultra-low emission zone in London, but they wove in far right, and this was untrue.
And so many things are untrue. The issue regarding COVID vaccinations and the risks. that Marianna Spring and the BBC described there as 55 deaths. Well, that might be 55 deaths where it's recorded on the death certificate, but of course it's over 2,000 if you go to the yellow card system, and if you then take on the yellow card and MHRA's own estimate of how much underreporting it is, it could be 20,000. And none of that's mentioned, right? They're putting forward an agenda that is at least based on partial information, and they are suggesting to the public, because we're the BBC, this is the whole story, and it just isn't. Now, fortunately, we have other people who are telling parts of the whole story that the BBC wish to conceal, including Norman Fenton, who is co-author of this Substack piece, MHRA, we have all the pregnancy outcome data, but we're not making it public yet. Now, this was a response to Cheryl's FOI request of 13th of April, looking for information on pregnancy data, and this was refused on the basis that it was going to be part of a future report, but there's no indication as to when that future report is going to appear. She did, however, get a redacted report dated July 2021, marked not for publication, that was sent to the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group for advice. Now, this described a group of people termed the Yellow Card Vaccine Monitor Group, 30,000 people self-selected who were reporting on adverse reactions from the vaccine. And in that group, where reporting was presumably much higher, 53% reported at least one adverse reaction. There were 1,366 pregnant women in that group, and those who had AstraZeneca reported adverse reactions 66% of the time. But the report is now quite elderly, and its timing was not long after the injections, so there only had been 6 births by that point, so we don't really know the outcomes for pregnancy. And this brings us to our guest, Professor Norman Fenton. Norman is the Emeritus Professor of Risk at Queen Mary University and Director of Agena Limited. Norman, welcome today. Could you tell us more, please?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, thank you.
Yeah, so the weird thing is, as you say, they set up this special monitoring group specifically to closely and regularly monitor vaccine recipients over a prolonged period. And of course, it was especially important to do that for pregnant women because we didn't have any long-term safety data. And yet it seems that not only do they have the results of this, and they're using this, this section, this section 22 of the Freedom of Information Act to not release it, but it appears that they might well have actually terminated that monitoring, that close monitoring, as early as July 2021. We certainly haven't seen anything since then. And as you said, that already exposed some very, very serious safety signals. It's not just the enormous proportion of people who are being monitored who actually experienced at least one adverse reaction. We see, as you said, at least there was over half, but there were also those interesting differences, like the AstraZeneca vaccine was again far more likely to result in adverse reactions. So of those receiving the AstraZeneca, I think it was almost 60% reported at least one adverse reaction, compared to, say, only 39% for Pfizer. So you've already got those problems. And in the pregnant women, of those who received the AstraZeneca, there was a whopping 66% who already reported at least one adverse reaction. So you've got those obvious safety signals, right? But then you've also got the interesting thing that comes out of it is the enormous underreporting that must be going on, because at the same time, they also were getting the yellow card, they were also talking about the normal yellow cards, one that, not on the monitoring scheme. And at that point, I think that there were something like, it was 300, just going to check this. I think there were just over 300,000 separate individuals reporting yellow card adverse reactions, so to the normal system. And that represented only about 1% of the people who had received the vaccine at that time. So what you've got on the one hand is where you've got the non-active monitor, where you've got the active monitoring, i.e. people are being encouraged to report their adverse reactions. You've got over 53% reporting them, but where they have to go through the awful yellow card system, which is incredibly difficult to complete, and we know all the problems with it, you've got only basically 1% reporting. So there you get a feel for how enormous the underreporting is in the yellow card scheme.
And of course, this is the very reverse of what's been suggested to us, because whenever the 2,000 deaths reported in the yellow card scheme are mentioned, the response is, oh, well, you know, anyone can report to this. We haven't substantiated this. And the suggestion is that there's huge over-reporting. It's never quite stated, but that's the impression that's given. And this is quite the reverse of what you've just outlined as demonstrable.
Yeah,
fact.
absolutely. We know there's underreporting, and it's almost. I mean, okay, they will argue that the monitoring group may be more likely to record less serious, adverse events, which wouldn't normally maybe be recorded by people who are having to go through the online yellow card scheme. But we are talking about a difference between 53% to 1%. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you've got to remember the MHRA have always admitted that the underreporting, that they have said before that they only believe that at most 10% of people report the adverse reaction. So they've already admitted that. And what this evidence is clearly showing is that it's less than 10%. It's well under 10%. And there's no reason to believe that it's significantly different for death reporting either. Just one other interesting thing about this report. So what they did send to Cheryl, and they also sent this to Nick Hunt as well. So they actually sent a redacted document, which was marked not for publication, which they had sent at the end of June 2021 with this information. That's how we get it, because this was what they did send, this redacted report. They sent that to their pharmacovigilance expert advisory group for advice. They wanted those people to say, well, what's going on here? Are there any safety signals? Blah, blah, blah. That's what they were intending it for. And that's the reason why we've actually seen this data. This was never intended for publication. But the interesting thing is in this document, they actually hide the most serious adverse reactions, because the only adverse reactions that they list are what they call the 20 most common ones. And of course, death and the most serious ones are not amongst the most common reactions. So we don't even know from this report, they're not even revealing how many of those were deaths.
Norman, thank you very much for that. For the moment, we'll hopefully have a chance to come back to you, because we've more on matters COVID related to discuss now.